Well, I have the pleasure of getting us started this evening. I would say welcome to all. I'm Allison Green Myers, she, her. I am the program director here at the Highlights Foundation, and I am joining you this evening from northeastern Pennsylvania on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Lenape Nation. Welcome to this month's HF Gather. A note for all of our attendees who are just coming back to join us, or maybe it's their first time with us this evening. This is a webinar style gather, so Sarah and Jasmine cannot see your video or hear your audio during the session, but they can see what you type in the chat and they can see any questions that you put in the Q&A box. So please feel free to put questions right there in that Q&A box. And then after the conversation, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. I would remind you that in these spaces, our HF gathers, the chat, the Q&A box, as well as all Highlights Foundation programs, we do strive for a safe and inclusive environment. We ask that you join us tonight with no hate, no harm, and no harassment of any kind. We are here to grow together in tonight's conversation with great appreciation and respect. Tonight, we get to listen to a special conversation between storytellers Sarah Aronson and Jasmine Warga. New York Times bestselling author Jasmine Warga writes books for kids and teens. Her gorgeous novel in verse, Other Words for Home, received a Newbery honor, a Walter honor, a Charlotte Huck honor, and more and more and more. Her newest book, out just this month, is middle grade novel, The Shape of Thunder, and it is magical. I know that that sentence doesn't really clarify enough. It doesn't answer the question, Allison, what makes this book magical? Jasmine's writing does, and I'm so glad that tonight we'll get to hear from her reading from this special book. This evening, Jasmine is joined by fellow storyteller Sarah Aronson, who, as you know, writes everything from picture books to adult mysteries. She is an avid reader and a champion of bringing books to readers. Even more is the way that she champions great writers to just keep going, keep going, keep going in this sometimes hard business of creativity. I want to thank you both so much for being here. With that, I'll turn things over to the two of you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Allison. Jasmine, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Is there anybody here for the first time who's never been to an HF Gather before? If so, let me know in the chat. Oh, hi, Vivian, really? Wow, hi, Desiree, welcome. Hi, Pat, excellent. HF Gather, when I'm leading an HF Gather, it's usually about three things that start with C. Creativity, community, and curiosity. I love talking about those three C's. Craft, more C's. It's fun. I also like talking about things that start with I. Inspiration, intuition, and intellect, and of course, ideas. So let's get started today. Welcome to everyone. Please, again, put your questions in the chat. Let's start by looking back at this crazy, extraordinary year. And let's start with that first C, creativity. How did you stay productive? Were there any silver linings that you discovered? Any lessons learned from this year?
Yeah, well, I first want to say hi to everyone and thank Allison and George and Highlights for having us. And thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me here to have this conversation with you. I'm really excited to get to talk about writing and creativity. And yes, this year was bonkers and so different. You know, the immediate negative for me was that, like so many of us, what had been my routine and schedule was dumped upside down when the school that my little girls go to closed down, which obviously made complete sense given what was happening, but in the practicalities of my life made it very difficult. And so I had to return to this idea of figuring out when to write in the crevices of the rest of my life. And I'm lucky enough that my partner, my husband, was really in it with me. And so we created kind of a shared schedule of flipping back and forth, but it also meant that for so long I had known my work time was between like 8:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. And something about my brain had gotten used to that. I'd gotten used to exercising my muscle then. And suddenly, you know, I was writing at 4 p.m. instead, or I was writing really early in the morning before the girls woke up. And the silver lining of that, though, is I think my brain started to work in a different way than it had before. These ideas that had never occurred to me for stories started coming to me. And I mentioned this to you earlier when we first got on the Zoom, but because everything slowed down and because I was having such like a really intimate parenting experience with my kids in a way that I feel like I hadn't had since they were newborns, where we were with each other almost every second of every day, I was able to sort of observe them in a different way and really live and inhabit their world. And the whimsicalness of the way that they view the world, the way that magic is so front and center to them, really set off inspiration for me and the way that I think about writing. And so I feel like the next couple of projects that I'm going to work on are really a big shift, kind of in tone and maybe genre from what I worked on before. And I really think that is because of the pandemic, because how could my writing not change when the entire world has turned upside down? But I'm really, like I said, excited to see how it has affected everyone's work, because I think so many of us, it has just really shook up our routine.
I kept all through this year, I kept thinking, why not? And why not now? And why not try this? Because if not now, when? And there felt like to be an urgency for creativity, because I missed connecting with people in other ways. And so connecting through story became even more important. Now, are you saying that there might be, I heard the word magic, and of course my heart went like, ooh, magic? Is there magic in this new story?
Well, you know, in the new story, there actually isn't. It's just more, I think, like a stretch of my imagination. So I can talk about it because it's been announced and everything. So my next novel, which is going to come out next fall, is called Resilience, a Mars rover story. And it is a book told from the perspective of a Mars rover who goes on a mission to Mars and their relationship with the other NASA vehicles. And so I kind of pitched it as sort of like One and Only Ivan, but with robots. And it is an idea that completely came to me because of my 3-year-old, who's now 4. She loves space. And so I'd set up for her on the afternoon that the rover was launching the TV to be able to watch the launch. And she turns to me, and I'll never forget, in her little froggy 3-year-old voice says, "Mommy, do you think the robot is nervous?" And right there, the whole book just appeared to me. But the project that will come after the Mars rover book, I call it Res, because in the book, the rover's name is Resilience, but is affectionately called Res as its nickname. The book that will come after was always going to be kind of a summer trip to Jordan book, and now is like definitely has lots of magic and is fantastical in a way that I don't think it ever would have been before the pandemic. And I don't know how much of that has to do with those of us who have written like contemporary books. I think that it's really hard to write realistic fiction right now, at least for me, because I don't understand our world that well right now. I don't understand what the ramifications of this means. And so I think I have retreated into this other sort of space. But also I think it's just the complete mix-up of everything.
That sounds great. I love that. I love when we stretch ourselves. I mean, that when we stretch ourselves and reach and risk falling and we find greatness that we could never have found otherwise. And it's wonderful to read and to see people grabbing the moment.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about Simone Biles, and like, because she can, that's why she's going to do it, because she can. And this is what you can do because you can, and because we can, and it's great. So let's go back even a little bit before the pandemic, and let's just spend a little bit of time with Other Words for Home, which is such a beautiful book and an award-winning book. So, some of us love to hear the stories of the call. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like? And as long as we're talking about the kids, what was it like for them?
Yeah, so I think I was talking with my editor and my agent actually about how things have changed a little bit, that before like the advent of social media, the run up, I think, to like the ALA awards wasn't like so ever present in the industry that you knew. So I wish I could say that the night before it was like all going to go down, that I didn't have any idea, but I did, because some really lovely, well-meaning librarians and educators were tagging me all through the month in January and mock Newbery things and, sending messages of encouragement. And while that's so wonderful and so flattering, it's also really kind of messes with your head a little bit. Like I loved getting to talk with all the mock Newbery clubs, and that was an amazing way to connect with kids, but it also gets you kind of tooled up. And so the night before, I never sleep with my cell phone. And I said to my husband, I was like, is that really like presumptuous? Like, I don't in any universe think this is actually going to happen. But like, he was like, well, just have your phone, there just in case. And I was having kind of trouble sleeping. And then I had this moment of clarity where I was like, this is bonkers. Like, I am not going to get a call from the Newbery Committee, but tomorrow's going to be a wonderful day because I loved so many books that were written in 2019. I couldn't wait to see which books were chosen and were going to be celebrated. And I just went into the deepest sleep. And the next thing I remember is Greg nudging me, being like, your phone is ringing. I was like sleeping through it and answering, and the chairwoman's voice just being so bright. And when she said John Newbery Committee, I remember I just started crying. And I think I kept saying like, I'm sorry, I don't have anything smart to say. And I think they were like, we're not expecting you to like make a speech. Like, I was just so groggy and tired and I didn't know. And then I texted my editor and I was like, hey, I don't want to wake you up because I'm not completely sure this is real, but I also think I just got a call saying that they're going to give Other Words for Home a Newbery honor, but I don't know, like, for sure. And then she responded back and she's like, we know, like, we're freaking out. And yeah, and so we set up in our house, like, to stream the awards, and I let the girls stay home late from school. We had like hot chocolate, and they don't obviously really know what it is, but they love stickers. And so the idea that like I was going to get a sticker, or we were going to be sent stickers, and so I got a package of the stickers in the mail. I let them like put some of them on the books with me, and that was to them the most exciting thing. But I couldn't stop crying that day, because for me, like, what I remember, and I don't know if you have this childhood experience, but like I didn't really know what the Newbery was, but I knew those gold and silver stickers, and almost every book we were assigned to read in class or that I was being recommended from my library, a lot of them had that sticker. And so I knew like that meant something to me, like in a way that I didn't quite expect. And then this idea that like that the wording of the Newbery is about like a contribution to American children's literature. And so I kept thinking about the idea of this particular book, of Jude's story, this particular book with her on the cover having that sticker, and what that means for what an American story is. And it still makes me cry when I think about that. It just feels to me, I can't help but wonder what it would have felt like for 10-year-old me to see that book with that sticker and what that means. And so I was like so emotional the whole day. I think I was freaking out, like my publishing team. I think they were like, this is a really good thing. And I'm like, no, I know. I just like cry when I feel really overwhelmed and completely don't expect, nobody expects those kind of things to happen.
I actually think the secret to all of life is low expectations, and then just enjoy the surprise when it comes. But I was not surprised that you got a sticker, and I say to you, stickers are everything. That I love stickers. That this book was just so beautiful, and with such and as you were talking about an American and a contribution to American books, that this book with that centers setting and a place and how much home means to people, that I was not surprised. I was so happy for you.
Thank you.
To move to craft, move to that C called craft, though. So Other Words for Home is in verse, and The Shape of Thunder is, I was expecting it to be in verse, and then I opened it and it was in prose with letters. So can you take us a little bit through your process of how do you decide how you're going to write a book?
Yeah, Other Words for Home was not initially a verse novel, which is like surprising, I know, for lots of people to hear, but it never occurred to me that I could write a novel in verse. My first two YA books were in prose, and poetry is a huge part of my reading life, and is something that I love, but was never, like, I don't consider myself to be a poet. And I actually have a lot of friends in my life who I consider like legit poets who, have their MFA in poetry. And so but I was really struggling with Other Words for Home. And I bet everyone on here who writes is going to understand what I'm saying, even though I think sometimes when I explain this to non-writers, they don't get it. But I had this idea of how I wanted the book to feel. I knew how Jude's voice should sound. And we worked on the book over and over again, my editor and I, and it was a really solid book that, all the things she could have helped me fix, she did in terms of plot arc, character. But to me, the voice just still didn't feel right. And I realized I was having this mind block because Jude's first language is Arabic and her second language is English. And I really wanted to capture the cadence and texture of Arabic. And I felt like I wasn't able to. And then I just had this aha moment, which I always used to be really annoyed when I would listen to writer interviews and they would talk about an aha moment. Like, I'm like a super mega fan of Kate DiCamillo, and I remember like listening to her talk about different things and being, that's not helpful, Kate, though. Like, but really, how did you do it? And so now I have to laugh because I feel like I had my own experience of this, but I just had this moment where I was like, what if I put the book into verse? That will maybe help to exalt the language in the way that I'm looking for, to give it that cadence and texture. And Arabic culture has such a long history of celebrating poetry too. And I think that all of these things now I understand in like a more conscious way. But at the time, the decision was just kind of hazy. And the book was about to go to copy editing. And I'll never forget, I called my agent and I was like, hey, I really think I want to rewrite the book in verse. And she was like,
that late?
Yeah, it was very late. And she was like, no, what are you talking about? Which is obviously her job. That was a smart thing to say. And I was like, please, 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 will you just look at these 3 chapters? And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And my agent actually had been the editor of a book I loved when I was younger called Out of the Dust, which is one of the first novels I ever read. And so I remember thinking like, she'll tell me, if I'm bonkers, which I could tell she thought that I was on the phone call. And then I remember her calling me back and saying, okay, I think you're right, but this is going to be a difficult conversation. Let me call Alessandra. And credit to my editor and my whole publishing team. The book had to be moved back a season, but they also were on board with, we wanted to make it the best book we could possibly make it. And I don't know, it just, you have that spidey sense, right? When I think all of us were never satisfied, right? Every time my book goes to copy editing, there's like this really fraught moment of, did I get everything? But what was happening before that, it was just too big of a pill to swallow. Like you have to feel like you've found the heart of the book. And I think that in putting in diverse, that's how it was. So when people are surprised that Shape of Thunder isn't in verse, I get that now, but I've been working on Shape of Thunder like for a really, really long time, way before I had any idea that Other Words for Home would find the audience that it has found. And so it's funny to me to be kind of, I guess, known now as a verse novelist, that like that's what people's expectation would be. And so I feel so bad. I feel like I've spent a lot of the lead up to Shape of Thunder being like, no, I'm sorry, it's not a verse novel. Never occurring to me that that's what people would think. And, you know, I think someday I would love to write another book in verse. It's just, for me, I think the structure chooses, the story chooses its structure, right? So I can't just say, hey, I'm going to write a verse novel. I think I need an idea that needs to be in verse. The Rover story, though, while not in verse, is very close to verse, and that it's very like simplistic, sparse, quick, short chapters. And so I think it reads a lot like a verse novel, which is funny to say, like my robot book is going to be my return to verse. But in lots of ways, I think it's a really similar writing style. But again, structure, like the story chooses it.
Right. Well, I don't know who is the writer who says story is the boss. It might be Stephen King.
Oh, I don't know, but I love that. I'm gonna
story is the boss. So Head Case, my first novel, I originally wrote in verse, and that became an outline for the prose that came later. And even now, sometimes if I'm having trouble, and I recommend this to everyone, if you're having trouble getting a chapter done, try writing it freehand in verse and see if that helps you find the heart of that chapter. It's really helped. That has always helped me. I know that people in the chat are recognizing the sad news of today, that Eric Carle has passed away. And I think that just to take a deep breath and just acknowledge what a huge contribution he has made to all of us. Lewis Ehlert as well, and two giants in our industry. May their memory be a blessing, and may their books continue to inspire new readers and new writers for the rest of eternity. I was lucky enough to hear Eric speak once about his journey, and just to be I think he wouldn't mind me saying this. His journey was inspiring and unique, and yet it was also just like everyone else's. Resilience, persistence, creativity, taking chances, creating lots and lots of material, some of which never made it to books. So thank you for everything, Eric Carle and Lois, whose books I have here that inspire me as well. Today is a day. All right, let's return to, let's talk a little bit about Shape of Thunder. Would you mind reading a little bit?
Yeah, I'm gonna read like the first page, but before, I just want to say Brown Bear is the first book I ever read independently myself. So I think so many children and now us grown-ups have probably had that experience with Eric Carle's work.
Hungry Caterpillar is the first book I bought my grandchildren.
Yeah, and just that same way. So echoing everything that you said and feeling very emotional about that news, but grateful that we have this work, and I know that it will be celebrated and loved for years to come. All right, so I'm not great at I guess smooth transitions, but now, so I will read the first page from Shape of Thunder, and the only thing that I want to say before I start is that it is a book that is told from two perspectives, Cora Hamed and Quinn McCauley, and Cora is the narrator of the first chapter. So I like learning things, especially about math and science, because they help explain why the world is the way it is. A famous mathematician once said, "Mathematics is the music of reason." I've always believed that. The best thing about math is that it makes sense. The actual best thing about math is that everything adds up, all neat and in order. Here's what I know about the number 12. 12 is 4 times 3. 12 is 6 times 2. 12 is 10 plus 2. This is all simple math, right? Elementary school stuff. Reason and logic. 12 is also 2 less than 14. 14 is how old Mabel was when she died. I am 12 today. Someday in the future, I will be more than 12 plus 2. I will become older than my older sister. There is no music in that fact. There is absolutely no reason. It does not add up, all neat and in order.
Beautiful. Thank you. Why this story now?
You know, the story first came to me, like I said, I'd been working on this book for a while, and the first kind of, I guess, spark of inspiration came when we were living in Chicago. I lived across the street from an elementary school, and it was brought to my attention that they were going to be having a lockdown drill. And I realized that my daughter, my oldest daughter, who was 3 at the time, she's now 5, was going to go to that school soon, and I was going to have to talk to her about why they had active shooter lockdown drills. And I didn't know what I was going to say, and I felt infuriated that we have yet to have any substantial action taken to solve this problem, when all of us, I think, on here, by and large, regardless of our political affiliation or belief or what we believe the solution should be, feel that the solution is not placing the responsibility onto our kids. And so with this, I started thinking a lot about how it seems like this subject is really absent in books for younger readers. We see it a little bit in YA, but I was thinking about the way this violence in our society does affect our young kids, from the fact they know about it, from having to do these lockdown drills, to the fact that, God forbid, if something happens, it affects the entire community. And what does that mean? And so this idea was just living in my head, which is how a lot of my ideas are. I don't know how your brain works, but for me, I always think of my brain like as like a 4 top stove, where it's like I have a lot of just ideas that are kind of like on simmer, and then I have the one that I'm like actively really cooking, which is whatever the book it is I'm working on, and I check in with the other ones to see, like, is something happening, or is it gonna be a meal that I can work on, or whatever, to extend this metaphor in a really overextended way. But so it was living, and then kind of, I guess, again, serendipitously, Other Words for Home started to have this amazing reception. I was lucky enough to be invited to lots of schools to talk with kids. And while doing these school visits, just from the way I entered the building, all these things, I realized how different life is for young people today with this issue, and started being able to have really candid conversations with kids about this issue, trying to figure out, you know, what does this worry them? What do they think about? And they had so much to say about it. And I realized they were begging for the chance to be able to have conversations with the grownups in their life. And I realized so many adults don't want to talk with their kids about this because it makes all of us uncomfortable. Like, I dislike talking about the subject so much, and I've spent 2.5 years working on a book about it. But I believe so much in the power of books as conversation starters, as ways to break the ice and be able to have discussions about things that make all of us uncomfortable. I think that's one of the most powerful things about books, is their ability to connect us in that way. And so that's what sort of made me push the book forward. And I really wanted to explore this idea of, why do we have this violence, like what is creating this culture of violence in our world. And I think having that discussion with young kids is important. It reminds me a little bit, like my first book deals with a lot of mental health things, and these two issues I think are very connected, and they remind me of this idea of somehow we've decided as a society that the solution is to create like a silo of silence, when I actually think the opposite is true. I think the more that we talk about it, the more progress we're going to be made. Like, I don't have the answers. I think a lot of us who are novelists, when we write about big issues, I mean, I feel this way about refugee things. I'm not a policy wonk. I'm not an expert in any way. It's more I write books to say, will you think about this with me, as opposed to you should think this about this. It's more, are you thinking about this too? Does this bother you too? Because I want to invite my young readers into a conversation and have them tell me what they think. I don't believe that I have the solution, but in my most ideal, optimistic way, I hope this reaches the young person who does have that capacity for bold ideas and imagination, and inspires them to think about it. And so in lots of ways, the book is also about that. It's about the power of imagination and the power of believing that things could change. And so yeah, that's, I guess, why this book. Now, I certainly did not think I was going to be revising this book in the depths of a pandemic, which was a very difficult book to work on in those early months of the pandemic. And now, you know, you never know the timing of your book, right? Like when things are going to happen, but it was really born out of my own fears as a parent and question about like what emotional vocabulary was I lacking in my ability to talk with my own daughters.
I'm felling because yes, books are a discourse. It's our way of starting a conversation, and starting a conversation that we want to have, and that our young readers are open and imaginative and can come up with so many answers when we just open the door. And I think this book opens the door in such a, I mean, it's magical, it's tender, and it's about the most important things. I mean, it's about the aftermath of a terrible event, but it's also about friendship and family and forgiveness, which are the very, like, the foundation of what so many kids are thinking about. I really loved it. I also love that you included Quiz Bowl. My son was a Quiz Bowl. He went to nationals twice, and says that you just have to know when to press the buzzer.
Yes, I was a Quiz Bowl kid too. So, and my favorite thing about it is the fact that I snuck in there that you get a physical for it, which is something my own parents always found funny, because my brother was like an athlete, but we both always had to get the forms, and they were like, Jasmine needs a physical for Quiz Bowl. I was like, it's very high pressure. Like, I'm sure my blood pressure results are important here. But it is, so much of it is the skill of like, when do you press the buzzer? Because you're anticipating the question.
Right, but also this young girl who Quiz Bowl is about having the answers. And with this, you don't have any answers. You have only questions. And it's just such a beautiful balance, such a very nice juxtaposition of ideas in this book, some emotional truth. I also love the parents, because the parents are three-dimensional. PSA from Sarah. Please write three-dimensional parents. Let's talk about creating secondary characters. Do you have special tips or special ways that you go about creating your secondary characters, especially adults?
Yeah, for grown-ups, I always think that it's easy to want to brush off those characters in our books because we're centering young people, we're writing books by young people. But if you're centering young people, think about who are the biggest influencers in young people's lives. And so I write really positive and warm parents because I was lucky enough as a kid to have really positive and warm parents. I also have parents, right, parents sometimes who are not as positive and warm, because I know that those are realities that kids are living in with. But I think the issue is whether you're writing a good parent or a bad parent, whether you're writing a good teacher or a presence that isn't as welcome in the kids' life. They need to feel real and full in all of their complexity. And so for me, the way I think about it is I just brainstorm from my character, right? And what their relationship is with them. So with Cora and her father, for those of you who haven't read the book, Cora's father is a Lebanese immigrant, and a big part of their dynamic is she feels like he doesn't share really a lot about his cultural heritage with her. And I think his reasoning is he wants her to feel American. And I think so many of us who have immigrant parents have had this experience of this push and pull from our parents and feeling like too much and also not enough. And so some of that was drawn from real life experience. And then I have so much fun with my secondary characters. I think they help you bring out your main character. So for example, like Cora's really excited when they get to go out to lunch after her therapist appointment because she gets to have as much soda as she wants. And I thought of that from thinking about just like, what is this dynamic? Like, what would the parent be like? What, and those tiny details, I think what people don't understand sometimes, or I didn't when I was just starting out writing, is that if you do the work on your secondary characters, your main character is also going to feel more full, because the way they construct and see themselves is all based off of relationships with other people. Like how you and I feel about ourselves, right, is in relation to the relationships that we have. I think a lot of the things that I'm proud of about myself come from the ways I see that responded to or reflected in the people that I love in my life, or the people that, you know, I interact with in my life. And so, and then it's really important to me too, to have really positive teachers and adults outside of the home, because for our kids who may be struggling at home, I want them to know there are people in their life who care and who want to help them. And like, that's why having that librarian character in The Shape of Thunder is so important to me, because I think that's so important for kids to know that they aren't alone, that there are helpers everywhere, and that there are people who really want to show up for them and that they can trust and be vulnerable with. And I think if you write books where all the grownups don't care about young people, to me, well, first, it doesn't ring true to me, and I'm interested in emotional honesty, but also I want kids to feel like there are those people that they can turn to and have. And so if another relationship in their life is failing them, to know that there are people who want to help. And I taught 6th grade before I was a writer, and so I think that is kind of just important to me to show how teachers think about their students way beyond the classroom. And I think that's important for that to be reflected.
There's so much to infer from this book. I mean, all of the characters are dealing with grief, and all of them are coping in different ways, and all of them are loving each other in the best way that they can. And that felt so real to me. So let us go to the question and answer box and see if we have any questions. Do we have any questions from our friends? If you have a question, please put it in the box. But for now, I can see Evelyn would like to know if you would talk about your revision process.
Yeah, so I am a very messy writer. And the first thing I want to say when I talk about my process is everyone's process is so different. And so if what I'm saying completely doesn't sit right with you, that is totally fine. I think Sarah and I know, and I've never met another writer who has the exact same process. But I am kind of like, well, I talked about how ideas live in my head for a long time. And so a big part of my process is this imagining time. And so I'd really also like to stress that for all of you. I think sometimes we're really difficult on ourselves as writers, that, you know, if our word count hasn't ticked up today, we feel like it's a wasted day. And so much of writing is thinking and letting yourself really meditate on what is this story? Who are your characters? What are you asking of the reader? And so that's a big part of my process. And then, so I will have thought about this for a long time, and I will have my character, and I'll have an idea of who they are, an idea of what their situation is, and then I just jump in. And this means that my drafts tend to be really messy. I tend to take a lot of wrong turns and have to delete things. And then once I have my draft and I have it in like a condition that is somewhat can hold water, I send the book to my editor. And her and I have this process because I think I am one of her messier writers, where my books change a lot. Like when I talk about like first draft, second draft, third draft, I'm talking about like 70% rewrites from first to second draft. So I really re-envision things. And so we'll have like a really long conversation about the book, and she will point out like the major big things that she thinks are an issue. And then I'll think on that for a little bit. And then usually I email her or hop back on the phone and say, okay, hey, how about this? So I'll give a real-time example of the book I'm working on right now. So for the Rover book, she really loved a lot of things about it, but felt like it needed to feel more complicated. Like right now, it just is feeling like it's lacking in a certain ingredient or like X factor. And we realized that maybe what we need is another point of view. And maybe that point of view needs to be a child's point of view. But that's really difficult, right? When I have this book told from the perspective of a NASA vehicle, because they're like kept when they're being built in really like pristine extreme lockdown conditions, because NASA really doesn't want like any contaminants, because you don't want the rover to like come back from Mars and we think we found this like particle and it was actually somebody tracked it into the lab. So it was a lot of brainstorming to figure out. And then I reread Sharon Creech's Love That Dog, and had this idea, student assignment, like journal, in tandem with the rover, of a science class who's studying it. And it's all very, as you can even hear me talking, very hazy right now. But I emailed my editor and said, okay, do you think this might work? And she loved it and was like, yes, I think that could be the thing we're looking for. And so right now what I'm doing is working on trying to conceive this new viewpoint, figuring out how to merge it into the story, figuring out who this other viewpoint is, who this kid is. And then I'll send that, and then we will go through edits. But it's very much like a sort of messy, organic process for me. I don't plot ahead of time, but I think that's also because my books so far have not been plot heavy books. I think that if I was writing like a high fantasy book that I intended for it to be a series, I would have to change up my process.
That's cool. I love that you're a reimaginer. I would say 100% of everything I do in the first draft is gone in the second draft. I'm wrong about everything, but you have to get it on the page first before you can figure it out. All right, so from Beverly, how do you go about getting into your secondary characters' heads? How do you figure out how your main character will interact with them?
Yeah, so my biggest tip for this is I actually write scenes that don't take place within the arc of the novel. I think sometimes we struggle with figuring out our secondary characters, because if you only know they're going to be like in this scene, in this scene, in this scene, you only then feel like you know that about them. So I try to write like really mundane scenes with my main character, with my secondary character, to figure out what their vibe is and explore that way, and figuring out kind of what it is that my main character's relationship with them is. Sometimes I'll even switch and write in the secondary character's head, imagining the main character, to try to think. I try to be careful here because so far all of my books have been in first person, and so the trick of first person is you kind of are limited to, you really only know what the character would know about the person, but you still, that can be a helpful trick to get to know more about the character, because little things will come out. I also try to think about, it was explained to me once by my editor, which I think was really a great tip, of you can try an exercise where you describe like somebody else in your life, and like think about those little details that make the person a person. So it's like, I could tell you that I have a 4-year-old daughter and, she's sweet and she's nice, but that would be very flat. Like that's like the general thing. But when I think about my 4-year-old, I think about her capacity for joy and her capacity for anger, and how she's my kid who lives in a really wide, like really fierce spectrum of emotions. Her obsession with dinosaurs, all those little like specific things, the way that she does not like to wear socks, those like funny little details about a person that make them specific. I think you want to search for in your secondary characters. So if you have a parent, think about, is this a parent who rushes home from work to make dinner? Or is this a person who is more a parent like me, who's constantly trolling DoorDash to see like what they can carry out? Like just knowing that, it might not show up in your book, but that tells you a lot about a person.
Knowing your characters and your character profile. And I don't know if any of my side writing friends are here, but side writing, we love side writing, and figuring that out in the journal. That is, to me, the most important thing that we do, because once you really know all of those characters, then you know how they're going to act in the scene, and you can go deeper to illuminate that main character's journey. I love that. I love that. Do you struggle with present versus past tense?
I do, and I really, really did for The Sheep of Thunder, because for a while I thought that I was going to write the book maybe in third person because I worried about being able to have 2 distinct first person voices. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll put one of them in third, but then was it going to be third present because the first person voice is present? So I, for some reason, have defaulted to first person present. I think that, I don't know why that has been like a default place for me. But maybe it's because when I'm writing from a young person's perspective, that helps me to immediately sense that I'm in this moment with them at 12, as opposed to being an adult looking back at 12, which is not to say some of my very favorite middle grade books are written in past tense and feel very present in the character's viewpoint. It's just, for me personally, I think that's a little bit of a hack that I rely on, that if it's like right there in the present, I don't find myself like philosophizing or adultizing it that way. But I think that what I would say to you is, if you're struggling with it, is don't put too much pressure on it. Just write. And even if you're mixing tenses at the start, that's fine. You will be able to go back and figure out which one feels better to you. I think sometimes we are so afraid of making the wrong choice that we don't give ourselves the freedom just to explore. And I think the book will kind of choose for itself if you let it, if you just write and kind of see what is feeling more natural to you.
I'm going to do a shout out to 2 different writers. First, to Erin Dion, who encourages writers to find some limitations. So like you only get 500 words for a chapter, or you have first person present tense, and that those limitations can help you as you're creating your story. And then I also want to shout out to my roomie from Vermont College, Kelly Carter Crocker, who gave me the great line of, write that draft for a C-. Don't worry about getting an A, get a C-. So like if you mess up the tense, don't worry about it. Get the words on the paper. Another question, do we know that you have lots of ideas on the back burner, but do you actually work on more than one thing at a time?
No, so I really only work on one thing at one time, with the exception being when I am nicely asked to be in an anthology. So sometimes I'll be working on like a short story for an anthology and my novel, but I'm only ever actively working on one novel. But that doesn't mean that I don't journal about other ideas. So right now I'm actively editing the Rover book, but I'm really brainstorming, trying to figure out what this Jordan book is. And so I journal about it. I think about it a lot in the car. I get a lot of my ideas. I don't know. I know some people are like walking thinkers, which is better for the environment, probably better for my health if I was, but I'm like a driving thinker. So like if we have to take like a family trip somewhere, I'll be brainstorming in the car, thinking about the book, something about like the movement helps my brain to work. So that's the answer. I never actively write multiple projects. So when I was just starting out, I did. And I actually, for me, found that it was bad because I idea hopped instead of improving the book that I was working on and really committing to the book that I was working on. It was more, I used it as like a defense mechanism for when I got stuck going here, as opposed to really trying to figure out the book. But I have friends, again, everyone's different. I have really amazing writer friends who toggle lots of projects at once and hop back and forth. I think for me it'd be really hard because I was not a theater kid, so if I'm using this term incorrectly, forgive me, anyone who has a theater background, but I'm almost, I think, like a method writer. Like I really live in my books, and so it would be really hard for me to hop back and forth because voice is so important. Like I make like character word lists. I don't know if you do this at all, but I like think about like what is the vocabulary of my character? Like how would they describe the color green? Like would they use like a grassy, like would it be a nature reference? Would it be a gemstone reference? And like all those kinds of things. And so I really try to live in the world of my characters. And so it'd be hard for me, I think, to hop around that much.
I always have a peach sorbet. So I have my work that I'm working on, and then the peach sorbet at night when I'm really tired, I write a little bit, usually 10 minutes of something that I know I want to work on later. And it's just for me. So
God, I love that.
yeah,
so feel that like keeps the joy in it. I love that.
Yeah, and really, I started doing that when I was working on something really hard, and I didn't want to be in a bad mood when my husband got home. So the last question I want to ask today is really, we want to go back to that side writing, that writing away from the book, and do you have specific questions you like to ask yourself? Do you have rules for that? Prompts? How do you do your side writing?
For me, it's just more about what I'm trying to figure out with the character. So with every single one, it's different. So, you know, if it's a parent thing and the parent relationship seems strained, I might try to write more scenes where I'm bringing out like why it's strained, to try to figure out like what that dynamic looks like. Or, you know, if it's a casual friend at school, trying to figure out like how do they know each other? How do they interact in a mundane way in a classroom? Like what does it look like if they're eating lunch at the cafeteria together? What do both of them pick out to eat? What does that say about them? So it's more, I guess I don't have strict prompts. It's more like I will read through and be like, okay, this character isn't coming alive on the page. What is it that I need to know about them? To make them come alive, to make them feel more interesting to me. I think a lot of side writing to me, honestly, is being more emotionally curious about my secondary characters. I think sometimes we can have like myopia, right, about or like kind of, you know, nearsightedness about our main characters. And I hope that doesn't come off as pejorative. I'm like massively nearsighted myself, so apologies if that made anyone feel that way. But we can have like that kind of tunnel vision about our main character. And so I think that remembering to be curious and have that curiosity about our secondary characters is where the side writing for me comes from. But I'm sorry, I don't have like a specific prompt that I use for any of them, because every time it's different, because every time it's something, and lots of times, actually, one more trick that I'll throw out that I've noticed is I like to do it in settings that I am going to use in the book, though, to try to bring out, so even if it is something as like mundane as the cafeteria, if I know there's going to be another scene there, to try to figure out that setting more can help it come alive, because I'm thinking about it in a different way, because I'm thinking about it in terms of that character as the main character.
My side writing these days has been in two different forms. Like either I write to myself, why is this scene so boring? Usually because of the secondary characters and I haven't done enough with them. But sometimes it's just I haven't spent enough time in the emotional truth of that character, and I don't know where it is. And also the word why, like why is this scene happening now? Why are these people feeling exactly this way? Do I know that yet? And boy, like it's really important to just understand the why behind each scene and behind all your decisions from yourself as well as from your characters. But these days lately, I have been drawing a lot.
Yeah.
I made a mural the other day of my setting. It was super fun. Don, yes. So I also use Pomodoro. Do you ever use Pomodoro technique?
Is that the thing where like you set the timer and you can only do it for that amount of time? I have done that before, and I've done that really, I did a lot in early motherhood when I felt like I just can't do anything. And I would say you can do anything for 10 minutes. So just set this 10-minute timer. And something about that does really help, I think.
For me, the magic is the in-between. So when I'm writing, I can always do anything for 20 minutes. But then when I lie down to get comfortable with the silence and let ideas come to you, has been a wonderful thing to do as well. And I think of Pomodoro sort of like side writing because it welcomes new ideas.
Sure.
So let's welcome Allison and George back to the board. This was so lovely. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation.
It really was. I thank you both so much. Thank you for your ideas and your inspirations. And Jasmine, I'm so glad that you read from The Shape of Thunder tonight too. The book is just stunning, and I know it is at a local bookstore. It is at a library. It's waiting for everyone who's listening tonight to go out and read that. I also thank you both for recognizing the loss of Eric Carle and Lois Elhart too. That was very kind of you. We'll carry your words with us from tonight too. Before we say goodnight, I do want to say hello and thank you to George Brown. I realize I didn't get a chance to do that at the beginning. George Brown, our executive director here at the Highlights Foundation, and also a big thank you to everyone on the team at the Highlights Foundation who makes events like this possible, so that we can come together and we can listen and share and grow together. So thank you all for being here. We wish you great safety and peace tonight. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you
It was
so
awesome.
much.
So wonderful.